Part 1. The phantom handwriting. My name is Detective John Marshall, and I've carried the same leather notebook for 8 years. It's been my constant companion through hundreds of investigations, witness statements, evidence notes, observations, theories. Every page filled with my own handwriting, documenting the cases that defined my career. Until 3 weeks ago, when the notebook started writing itself. It began on a Monday morning. I'd left the notebook on my desk overnight, closed and locked in my drawer as always. When I opened it that morning, there was new text on a previously blank page. Not my handwriting, though eerily similar. The entry was dated that morning, 6:47 a.m., an hour before I'd arrived at the office. Robbery at 247 Market Street, 8:30 a.m. Suspect. Male, 30s, red jacket. Weapon, .38 revolver. 3 shots fired. Clerk wounded. Suspect flees east on foot. You will arrive at 8:43 a.m. You will be too late. I stared at the words, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Someone had written in my notebook, but who? And how did they know about a robbery that supposedly would happen in 2 hours? I checked the security footage from my office. No one had entered during the night. The drawer had remained locked. Yet there was the entry, written in handwriting that looked almost like mine but with subtle differences, slightly more angular, with an odd tremor in the letters. At 8:15 a.m., I drove to 247 Market Street, a convenience store in the downtown area. Everything appeared normal. The clerk was restocking shelves, a few early morning customers browsed the aisles. I positioned myself across the street, watching, waiting. At 8:31 a.m., a man in a red jacket entered the store. Mid-30s, nervous energy, hands in his pockets. I was already moving, reaching for my radio to call for backup, when he pulled a revolver. 3 shots. The clerk fell. The suspect fled east. I pursued, but he had a head start and knew the neighborhood. By the time backup arrived at 8:43 a.m., exactly as the notebook had predicted, the suspect had vanished into the maze of side streets. The clerk survived, but barely. And I stood in that crime scene, trying to understand how my notebook had documented a robbery 13 hours before it happened, with perfect accuracy down to the timestamp of my arrival. Someone setting you up, my partner, Detective Sarah Chen, suggested when I showed her the entry. Making you look prescient or crazy, depending on how it plays out. But how did they know? How did they predict the exact time, the weapon, even the direction the suspect would flee? Maybe they didn't predict. Maybe they planned it. Hired someone to commit that robbery at that specific time so their notebook entry would match reality. It was possible. But it didn't explain how they'd written in a locked notebook without leaving any trace of entry. The next morning, there was another entry. This time dated for that evening. Domestic violence call, 432 Elm Street, apartment 3B, 7:15 p.m. Suspect. Robert Martinez, 42. Victim. Maria Martinez, 38. Suspect has knife. You will arrive at 7:28 p.m. You will be too late. I arranged for patrol units to be stationed near 432 Elm Street well before 7:15 p.m. If someone was orchestrating crimes to match notebook predictions, we'd catch them in the act. If the prediction was somehow genuine, we'd prevent the violence before it occurred. But at 7:10 p.m., the patrol units were called away to a major accident on the highway, a 6-car pileup requiring all available officers. I was alone when I received the dispatch call at 7:16 p.m. about a domestic disturbance at 432 Elm Street. I arrived at 7:28 p.m., exactly as predicted. Maria Martinez was being loaded into an ambulance, knife wounds to her arms and torso. Robert Martinez was in custody, still holding the weapon, looking dazed and confused. "I don't know why I did it," he kept saying. I had to. Like something made me pick up that knife at exactly 7:15 p.m. I couldn't stop myself. Sarah pulled me aside. "John, this is too specific to be coincidence. Someone knows these crimes will happen before they happen. Or they're making them happen to match their predictions. The notebook said I'd arrive at 7:28 p.m. How could anyone know there'd be an accident that would pull away all the patrol units and delay my response by exactly 13 minutes? Unless they caused the accident too. John, what if someone has the ability to orchestrate events? To set up circumstances that guarantee their predictions come true?" Over the next week, 7 more entries appeared in my notebook. Each one documented a crime that would occur later that day or the next day. Each one included the exact time I would arrive. Each one ended with the same phrase. "You will be too late." And I was. Every time. Despite my best efforts to prevent the crimes, circumstances would conspire to delay me or complicate the response. A flat tire. A mistaken address on the dispatch. A false alarm that drew resources away from the real crime. It was as if reality itself was being manipulated to ensure the notebook's predictions came true. I started studying the handwriting more carefully, comparing it to my own. The similarities were disturbing: same slant, same pressure, same letter formations. But there was that tremor, that slight uncertainty in the strokes, as if the hand writing these entries wasn't quite steady. Then I noticed something else. The entries weren't just predictions. They were written as memories. Not "this crime will happen," but "this crime happened." Past tense, as if documenting events that had already occurred from the writer's perspective. What if, I said to Sarah, the person writing these entries is experiencing time differently than we are? What if they're writing from a point in time after these crimes have occurred, and somehow that information is appearing in my notebook in the present? Time travel via notebook? John, that's impossible. So is a notebook that writes itself. I decided to test a theory. Instead of trying to prevent the next predicted crime, I would do the opposite of what the notebook said I would do. If it predicted I'd arrive at 8:30 a.m., I'd arrive at 8 a.m. If it said I'd enter through the front door, I'd enter through the back. If the predictions were based on my expected behavior patterns, changing those patterns should break the cycle. The next entry appeared Tuesday morning. Carjacking at intersection of 5th and Main, 2:45 p.m. Victim: Sandra Lopez. Vehicle: black Honda Accord. Suspect: armed with handgun. You will arrive at 2:51 p.m. from the north. You will be too late. At 2:30 p.m., I positioned myself at 5th and Main, approaching from the south. I was 15 minutes early and coming from the opposite direction. There was no way the predicted sequence could unfold as written. At 2:45 p.m., Sandra Lopez pulled up to the red light in her black Honda Accord. At 2:46 p.m., a man with a handgun approached her car. But before he could complete the carjacking, I was there, weapon drawn, badge displayed. Police. Drop the weapon. The suspect ran. I pursued and caught him within 2 blocks. Sandra Lopez was shaken but unharmed. For the first time, I'd prevented a crime that the notebook had predicted. But when I returned to my office and checked the notebook, the entry had changed. The text was different than what I'd read that morning. Carjacking attempt at 5th and Main, 2:45 p.m. Victim: Sandra Lopez. Suspect arrested by Detective Marshall at 2:47 p.m. You arrived early from the south. You were in time. The entry had rewritten itself to match what actually occurred. The prediction had been overwritten by reality, or reality had overwritten the prediction. I couldn't tell which had come first. That night, I sat in my office staring at the notebook, trying to understand what I was dealing with. Was someone manipulating time? Observing the future and writing it down in my notebook? Or was the notebook itself somehow creating the future by documenting it? I flipped through the pages, examining all the entries that had appeared over the past 3 weeks. And I noticed something I'd missed before. The handwriting tremor was getting worse with each new entry. The letters were becoming more uncertain, more shaky, as if the hand writing them was growing weaker or more unstable. And the dates were progressing. The first entry had been dated 3 weeks ago. Each subsequent entry moved forward in time. If the pattern continued, the entries would eventually reach today's date. What would happen when the entries caught up to the present? When the notebook finished documenting whatever future it had been recording? The next morning, there was a new entry. But this one was different. Instead of predicting a crime, it was addressed directly to me. Detective Marshall, by now you've realized this notebook is writing your future. Or perhaps writing your past, depending on your perspective. The entries you've been reading are your own notes, written by you at the end of each day, documenting the cases you investigated. But something went wrong. Time became unstable. Your future notes started appearing in your present notebook, creating a loop where you read about crimes before investigating them, which influenced how you investigated them, which changed what you wrote about them later. You've been trapped in a causal paradox for 3 weeks. Every entry you read creates the timeline that leads you to write that entry. You can't prevent the crimes because preventing them would create a contradiction. You wouldn't write the notes about failing to prevent them, which means you wouldn't read those notes, which means you wouldn't try to prevent them, which means they'd happen anyway. The only way to break the loop is to stop reading the entries. Let the future unfold without trying to change it based on information from that future. Only then can time stabilize and the paradox end. This is your last warning. If you continue reading future entries, you'll be trapped in this loop forever. The choice is yours. Your future self. I stared at the message, my hands trembling. My future self? Had I been writing these entries all along, somehow sending information backward through time? I checked the handwriting one more time. Compared it to my own writing from recent reports. The similarity was undeniable. The tremor could be explained by stress, exhaustion, the psychological toll of being trapped in a time loop. But if this was true, if I was writing these entries from the future and they were appearing in my present, then every crime I'd failed to prevent was a crime I documented failing to prevent, which became self-fulfilling. The question was, did I trust my future self's advice? Should I stop reading the entries, let crimes happen without trying to prevent them based on foreknowledge? Or was this another manipulation, someone pretending to be my future self, trying to get me to stand down while they committed crimes unchecked? That night, I made a decision. I would read one more entry. If it appeared tomorrow morning, I would follow its instructions exactly as written, not trying to change anything, not attempting to arrive earlier or approach differently. I would let the predicted timeline unfold naturally. If the paradox was real, following the prediction exactly should close the loop. If it was a manipulation, the perpetrator would reveal themselves. The next morning, the final entry was waiting. Detective Marshall arrives at warehouse on Pier 7 at 11:47 p.m. Confronts the suspect who has been orchestrating events. Realizes the terrible truth. Makes the choice that ends the loop. This is the last entry. After tonight, the notebook writes no more. JM 11 hours until 11:47 p.m. 11 hours to prepare for whatever truth waited at Pier 7. And somewhere in the future, a version of myself had already lived through this confrontation and written this cryptic entry. I just had to hope my future self knew what he was doing. Because I sure as hell didn't. Part 2. The time loop closes. I spent the day researching Pier 7, trying to determine what I'd be walking into at 11:47 p.m. The warehouse district had been largely abandoned for years, an industrial area waiting for redevelopment that never came. Pier 7 specifically had been empty for at least a decade, ownership tangled in bankruptcy proceedings. But according to utility records, power had been running to one of the warehouses for the past month. Someone was using the space, off the books and out of sight. "I'm coming with you," Sarah said when I told her about the final entry. "The notebook says I arrive alone. If we're testing whether following the prediction exactly breaks the loop, I need to do it precisely as written." "John, this could be a trap. Someone could have been setting you up this entire time, luring you to an isolated location with these notebook entries." "I know. But I need to know the truth. If these entries really are for my future self, then I've already survived this confrontation. The fact that I wrote about it means I lived through it. Unless your future self wrote that entry knowing it would lure you to your death. What if you're walking into a timeline where you don't survive?" It was a disturbing thought. But I'd come too far to back down now. At 11:30 p.m., I drove to Pier 7. The area was dark and deserted, broken streetlights casting shadows across cracked pavement. The warehouse stood silent against the night sky, its windows dark except for a faint glow from the second floor. I entered at 11:45 p.m., weapon drawn, senses alert. The ground floor was empty, rusted machinery, old shipping containers, debris from years of neglect. But I could hear something on the second floor. Movement. Machinery humming. At exactly 11:47 p.m., I climbed the stairs and entered a space that had been converted into a makeshift laboratory. Computer equipment lined the walls, monitors displaying complex data streams I didn't understand. And in the center of the room, surrounded by technology, sat someone I recognized. Myself. Or rather, a version of myself. Older, grayer, exhausted. He looked up as I entered, and his expression was a mixture of relief and sorrow. "Detective Marshall," he said in my voice, weathered by time. "I'm glad you came. Right on schedule, just as I wrote you would." "Who are you? Some kind of clone? Alternate timeline version?" "I'm you, John. 53 days from now. Or I was, until I found a way to send information backward through time. These notebooks," he gestured to a stack of identical leather notebooks on the desk, "they're quantum entangled. What I write in mine at the end of each day appears in yours in the past. I've been trying to change things, to prevent crimes, to make us, better at the job. But every change I make just creates the circumstances that lead back to this moment. The causal loop. The paradox. You've been trying to give me foreknowledge to prevent crimes, but that foreknowledge influences my actions, which determines what crimes occur, which determines what you write, which determines what I know." Exactly. I thought I could help you, help us, save more people. But instead, I trapped us both in a deterministic loop. Every crime I documented, you tried to prevent, which influenced how the crimes unfolded, which matched what I'd written, which confirmed the timeline. The tremor in the handwriting. "You're not just older. You're dying." He nodded. "The quantum entanglement process, it's unstable. Creating a connection across time requires enormous energy, and it's been burning me out from the inside. I have maybe hours left. Which is why I needed you to come here tonight. To understand what I've learned and make a choice I couldn't make." "What choice?" "Whether to destroy the notebooks and break the connection, or keep them linked and continue the loop. If you destroy your notebook and I destroy mine, the quantum entanglement breaks. All the entries I've written disappear. You'll have no foreknowledge of any crimes. Some people I helped you save will die because you weren't warned. But the paradox ends, and time stabilizes. And if I keep the notebook? Then you inherit my burden. In 53 days, you'll be where I am now, exhausted, dying, desperately trying to use future knowledge to prevent crimes, but creating the very timeline you're trying to prevent. You'll write entries for your past self, closing the loop, ensuring this moment happens again. The crimes will occur as documented because documenting them makes them inevitable. You'll save some people but lose others, all while knowing that your efforts to change the timeline are actually cementing it. I looked at the notebooks, understanding finally the terrible trap my future self had created. By trying to give his past self an advantage, he'd ensured that advantage became a prison. There's something else you need to know, the older version of myself continued. The crimes you investigated over the past 3 weeks, the robbery, the domestic violence, the carjacking attempts, those weren't random. I selected them specifically. Crimes where my intervention through the notebook would save lives. But the criminals themselves, the victims, the exact timing, all of it was influenced by the fact that I'd written about it. Reality conformed to my documentation. I thought I was recording what would happen. Instead, I was creating what would happen by recording it. Like the autopsy reports, I realized. Observation creates reality. Exactly. And now you understand the choice. Keep the notebook, gain foreknowledge but ensure every documented crime happens as written, trapping yourself in the loop. Or destroy it, lose the foreknowledge, but allow reality to unfold naturally without being constrained by future documentation. I thought about the people I'd saved because of the notebook's warnings. Sandra Lopez, alive because I'd arrived early at the carjacking. Others who'd survived because I'd been forewarned, even if I couldn't prevent every crime. But I also thought about the burden. Knowing crimes would happen, trying desperately to prevent them, only to watch circumstances conspire to ensure they occurred as predicted. Living in a deterministic nightmare where free will was an illusion and every choice led back to predetermined outcomes. What do you want me to do? I asked my future self. I want you to end it. Destroy the notebooks. Break the loop. Let time move forward naturally instead of being trapped in this closed circle. I've been living with the guilt of knowing that my attempts to help created the very suffering I was trying to prevent. Don't inherit that burden. But people will die. People the notebook could have saved. People die anyway, John. That's the job. We can't save everyone. But trying to save everyone using future knowledge just traps us in a loop where we can't save anyone without that knowledge becoming self-fulfilling. It's a cage disguised as power. I picked up my notebook, the leather worn from years of use. It had been my companion through so many investigations, held so many memories. And now it held memories from a future that hadn't happened yet, a future that was causing itself by being remembered. Will destroying the notebooks kill you? Break whatever connection is keeping your timeline stable? Possibly. But I'm dying anyway. The quantum entanglement is consuming me. If anything, breaking the connection might be a mercy. He smiled sadly. Besides, if the paradox breaks, this timeline, this version of me, might never exist at all. The past 3 weeks might rewrite themselves without the notebook entries. You might never come to Pier 7 tonight. This conversation might unhappen. Then how will I remember your warning? How will I know not to try this same thing in the future? You won't. That's the point. If we break the loop correctly, you'll never have any reason to try quantum entangling notebooks across time because you'll never have experienced the consequences. The timeline will stabilize around a version of reality where this technology was never developed. It was dizzying to contemplate. By destroying the notebooks, I might be erasing the entire 3 weeks of foreknowledge, returning to a timeline where none of this had happened. But I'd also be erasing my future self, condemning him to non-existence or death or whatever happened when a causal paradox collapsed. I'm sorry, I told him. I'm sorry you went through this trying to help. Don't be. It taught me something important. The future isn't meant to be known or controlled. It's meant to be lived, one moment at a time, without the burden of foreknowledge shaping our choices. That's real free will, not knowing what comes next, but choosing anyway. I made my decision. I placed my notebook on the desk next to the stack my future self had accumulated. He added his current notebook to the pile. Together, we poured accelerant over the leather-bound prophecies of crimes yet to happen, or crimes that had already happened, or crimes that existed in quantum superposition waiting for observation to collapse them into reality. My future self struck the match. "One last thing," he said as flames began consuming the notebooks. "When you wake up tomorrow, if this works, you won't remember this conversation. You won't remember the notebook entries, the crimes, any of it. The timeline will rewrite itself around a version of reality where the quantum entanglement never happened. But somewhere deep in your unconscious, you'll remember one lesson. Don't try to know the future. Don't try to use foreknowledge to prevent crimes. Just do the job, one case at a time, without the burden of prophecy. That's how you save people, by being present in the moment, not haunted by futures that haven't happened yet." The flames consumed the notebooks. As they burned, I felt something shift, like reality was recalibrating around a new timeline. My future self began to fade, his form becoming translucent, a ghost being erased from existence as the paradox collapsed. "Thank you," he said, his voice distant. "For ending the loop. For choosing uncertainty over false certainty. For," he vanished before finishing the sentence. The notebooks were ash. The laboratory equipment began powering down, as if it had never been running. And I stood alone in an empty warehouse, wondering what I'd just done and whether any of it had been real. I woke in my apartment the next morning with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My leather notebook sat on my desk, exactly where it always did. I opened it, checking the pages. All blank except for my own handwriting documenting normal cases from the past weeks. No future entries. No crimes predicted before they happened. No trembling handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't quite. But there was one anomaly. On the last page I'd written in, there was a single line in my handwriting that I didn't remember writing. "Trust the present. Let the future take care of itself." I stared at that line, feeling like it meant something important, like it was advice I needed to remember. But I couldn't recall why or when I'd written it. Sarah called me that morning with a case, a robbery at a convenience store, a clerk wounded, suspect fled on foot. Standard investigation, no foreknowledge, just good old-fashioned detective work. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was grateful not to know what would happen next. Grateful to just do the job without the weight of the future pressing down on my choices. The notebook sat in my desk drawer, its pages waiting to be filled with observations from the present, not prophecies from the future. And whatever timeline I was in now, whether it was the original one or a rewritten one where the paradox had never happened, it felt right. I'd chosen uncertainty over predetermined certainty. Present over future. Free will over fate. And somewhere in a timeline that no longer existed, a future version of myself was grateful I'd made that choice. The end.